Hello everyone and welcome back to the next video on Angular, and in this video we will talk about what are the different bindings which are available in the Angular. So let's get started. So basically in Angular, bindings are categorized into two parts, the two categories, and the first one is a one-way binding and the second category is two-way binding. So let's start with one-way binding. And in this, the first one we are gonna talk about is interpolation binding syntax. And in the last video we have seen an example on this. If you have not seen, don't worry, we will discuss in detail in this video, and you will be acknowledged with all the bindings available in Angular. So in interpolation syntax, the syntax is this double curly brackets, and in all the slides you can see what are the annotations which we use to use that syntax in the name itself. So here if we see that there is the curly bracket. So let's look into one example. If you see in the app component.html, we use the curly bracket, and inside the two curly brackets we write the name of the variable. Say in our example it is title, and in the component.ts we have created a variable which is title, and we have assigned a value to it. So in this case it is hello viewers, and what it will do is that it will replace the content of the variable in place of the interpolation symbol which we have used. So if we see the output of this program, it will be something like this. So which is title is, which is our constant message, and after that there is a variable text attached to it. And in the end of discussing all the bindings, we are going to also see it into actual Visual Studio Code, and we will modify some values, and we will see and discuss that how it is used in practice. So if you know the concept and you just want to watch the working of it, you can skip to the last section of it. And for the different titles which we are going to discuss in this video, you can refer to the comments, and I have attached the different topics which I have covered in this video, so you can directly skip and move on to the topic which you are interested in. So the next is the property binding syntax, and as the system which we are following, you can see that we have square brackets. So property binding is used with a single square bracket, and from the name itself it is clear that it is related to property. So we have different tags in our HTML. Say for example we have an anchor tag, and in anchor tag we have properties like href and target and so on. So if we want that the property value, say for example href value should be dynamic, and it should be linked or based on some conditions, it should change the href value. So we use property syntax. So let's take an example. In this example we have discussed a button tag, and inside button we have a disabled property. So what it does is that if the disabled property is true, then the button or whichever field it is, say if it is a h1 tag or button or input, it will make that control or the input, the HTML control as disabled. So what we are doing here is we are changing the state of the disabled with the help of property binding syntax. And you can see that the disabled property is referring to is save details disabled property, and that property we have declared in our component.ts. so if you see, we have assigned it to true, so by default this button should be disabled. So let's look at the output of this program and see. We have the title is hello viewers from our previous example, and below that there is a button which is disabled. And how we know that it is disabled? Because it is very light gray in color. And also we will see this in our last section, so that in that it will be very clearly visible to you guys. So let's take a look on the last single or the one-way binding, which is the event binding syntax. And it is also very clear through the name that it is related to the event. So there are list of different events which we can use in our Angular, and you can get the list of all the events on the official website, which is angular.io if you want, and I will provide the link of all the events available in the description part of the video. So make sure you check all the events. So let's take a look on our example, and in this example we have used the click event, which is nothing but when you click on the button. So what we are doing is that on the click of the button we are redirecting it to a method which we have created, and the name is toggle save details. And you can see in the component.ts I have created that method, and what this method is doing is that it is toggling the value of is save details disable. So if we click the button once, and if the button is disabled by default, it will make the button enable, and if we click again it will make the button disable, and so on. So if we look at the output snapshot, we can see that if we initially the button is disabled, and if we click on the button it becomes enable. And from this also you can guess the difference between how a button looks when it is disabled and how it looks when it is enabled. So now let's take a look on the two-way binding properties, and it has only one, which is called as ngModel, and through the annotation it is very clear that it is a combination of event binding and a property binding. So it is embedded inside a curly in a round bracket, and outside that it is again embedded with a square bracket. So let's take a look on the example. So what it does is that why it is two-way binding. So I will try to give a small introduction, because what it does is that it is always making sure that the HTML part and the TS file is always in sync. So if we write something, if you see in the ngModel, I have assigned that directive to a name variable, and I have created that name variable in my TS. So if I write anything in that input box, the value which I have inserted is always assigned to the name variable. So at any moment if I take or print the name variable, it will have that value. So to check that, I have used the interpolation syntax just below the name, just below the ngModel. And what it does is that, let's take a look on the output. If I write anything in the input, so if you see the last one, in the input I have written my name, and at the just bottom of that, if you can see that it is already there in the label using the interpolation symbol. So I hope the basic idea is clear about all the bindings. If something is not clear, you can always add the comments and I will sort it out for you, and I will look into the issues which you are facing. and let's take a look on the practical part for now. So we are back to our Visual Studio Code, and I have already run this application, and we can see the output how it looks like. So the first one is the interpolation example in which I have displayed the variable name. So let's make some changes. If you see in this first section, we have title is and the interpolation symbol title. So let's change it a little bit. If we go inside our component.ts, we have our title variable, and let's see if we modify this as hello all, and you can see that it is now hello all. So it is all about interpolation syntax. The next one we will be looking at property binding, and in that you can see I have created this button as disabled. So if we go to that button part, we have this property bind syntax, and here we have disabled and it is pointing to this variable. So if we change this from true to false, you can see the difference now. It is now false, and what it should do, any guesses? If you are saying that the button should be enabled now, then you are correct, and you can see now the button is enabled. So this is all about property binding. So similarly, if you are having an img tag and you want that the src should have different images on basis of some conditions, you can use this property syntax. The next one is event binding, and what is event binding we have seen already, but let's make some changes. If you see in the click event, we are going to this method which is nothing but changing the state of this disable property. So in this component.html we have, if it is true it will be false, and if it is false it will be true. So it is a ternary syntax if you are familiar. So this is all about the click event. We will discuss this more in detail when we are actually developing our application. The next one is the ngModel, and let's see how it works in working. See, initially the value of the variable, which is the name, it is empty because I have just created an empty string. If we want that it should have some value by default, like enter your name, we will use single quotes always because the TS-lint wants that. Enter your name. Alt Shift F for formatting the code, and save. Save is optional because we have already configured auto save, if you remember. And now if you see, we have, if you refresh, because it is already deployed, you can see in both the places we have the value because we have used ngModel. So at all point this should be in sync. This is from the component.ts and it is from HTML using ngModel. So if you backspaces it, you can see it is gone. If you write anything, you can see it is always in sync. So it is very useful when we are using template forms, and what is all that we will discuss later. But for now I hope that all the types of I hope all the types of bindings are very clear to you, and this was very important but yet very simple concept, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.